All right, grab your quill pens and put on your powdered wigs, because today we are diving into the life of Thomas Jefferson. If George Washington is the father of America, Thomas Jefferson is the cool, eccentric uncle who knows a lot about wine, builds weird furniture, talks endlessly about freedom, but owes money to literally everyone in town. You might know him as the guy on the $2 bill, that piece of currency you only see when your grandma gives you birthday money or when you're at a strip club. But the real Jefferson, he was the original American paradox. He was a man who wrote, "All men are created equal," while owning over 600 human beings. He was a man who hated big government, but doubled the size of the country on a whim. He was a genius, an architect, a paleontologist, and arguably the first ever hipster in American history. Let's start with the origin story. Thomas Jefferson was born in 1743 in Virginia to a wealthy family. While other kids were out playing tag or learning how to shoot squirrels, young Tom was studying. This guy was the ultimate nerd. He studied 15 hours a day. He carried a Greek grammar book in his pocket just in case he had a spare 3 minutes. He learned Latin, Greek, French, Spanish, Italian, and probably how to speak to dolphins. When he was a teenager, his family home Shadwell burned to the ground. Now a normal person would ask, "Is my family okay? Is the money safe?" Jefferson asked, "Where are my books?" When they told him the books were ash, but they saved his violin, he reportedly sighed with relief. That is the level of nerd we are dealing with. He inherits a mountain of land and begins his life's work, building Monticello. Now, Monticello wasn't just a house. It was a physical manifestation of Jefferson's ADHD. He spent 40 years building, tearing down, and rebuilding it. He never finished it. It was a construction zone for his entire life. He installed automatic doors, a dumbwaiter for wine, and a clock that told you the day of the week. He also invented the swivel chair. That's right. If you are spinning around in your office chair right now, ignoring your work, you have Thomas Jefferson to thank. He literally invented a chair so he could look at multiple books without standing up. An icon of efficiency or laziness. You decide. But let's get to 1776. The American colonies are angry. They want to break up with Britain. The Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. Jefferson shows up tall, gangly, red-haired, and silent. He hated public speaking. He had a quiet, high-pitched voice and was terrified of confrontation. So while John Adams was screaming at everyone, he looked at Jefferson and said, "Hey, you're the writer. You do it." Jefferson goes back to his rented apartment, annoyed because the horses in the stable next door are too loud, and he writes the Declaration of Independence. This is where the first major contradiction hits. Jefferson writes the most beautiful breakup letter in history: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's poetic, it's powerful, it's perfect. But originally, Jefferson included a paragraph blaming King George for the slave trade, calling it a cruel war against human nature. Now hold on a second, Tom. You own hundreds of slaves. You are literally being served tea by an enslaved person while writing about how slavery is bad. The Congress edited that part out because the southern states threw a fit, and Jefferson sat in the corner pouting like a writer whose screenplay just got butchered by Hollywood executives. He called the editing process a mutilation. But the document passes, and Jefferson becomes a legend. After the war, he goes to France as the U.S. minister. And oh boy, did Thomas Jefferson love France. This is where he fully transforms into a pretentious foodie. He falls in love with French architecture, French philosophy, and most importantly, French wine. He goes on the wildest shopping spree in diplomatic history. He buys books, statues, paintings, and 86 crates of fancy furniture. He also discovers a little dish called macaroni. He sketches a pasta machine and brings the recipe back to America. So yes, Thomas Jefferson is the founding father of mac and cheese. You're welcome, Kraft Dinner lovers. But his time in Paris also introduces the darkest chapter of his life. He brings his enslaved servant James Hemings to learn French cooking. Later, Sally Hemings, James's sister, arrives. Sally was the half-sister of Jefferson's late wife. Yes, family trees, back then, were complicated and messy. In France, slavery was illegal. Sally was technically free the moment she stepped on French soil. She could have walked away. But she didn't. Historians believe she made a deal with Jefferson. She would return to Virginia and be his mistress only if he promised to free her children when they turned 21. Jefferson, the man who wrote about liberty, enters into a sexual relationship with a woman he owns. It is the stain that will never wash out of his legacy. It makes him human flawed, and to many a hypocrite. But you can't keep a good ego down. He runs for president in 1796 and loses to his old friend John Adams. Back then, second place became vice president. This was a terrible system. Imagine the winner of the Super Bowl having the loser as their assistant coach. Jefferson spends 4 years actively sabotaging Adams. He pays journalists to call Adams blind, bald, crippled, and toothless, and a hideous hermaphroditical character. Yes, that is a real quote. Politics has always been dirty, folks. Then comes the election of 1800. It's a rematch, Jefferson versus Adams. But it ends in a tie between Jefferson and his own running mate, Aaron Burr. The House of Representatives has to decide. They vote 35 times. Deadlock. Finally, Hamilton steps in. He hates Jefferson, but he thinks Aaron Burr is a sociopath. Hamilton convinces people to vote for Jefferson, saying, "At least Jefferson has beliefs even if they are wrong." Jefferson wins. This is the Revolution of 1800. It was the greatest real estate deal in history and completely illegal by his own standards. He sends Lewis and Clark to explore this new land. He gives them specific instructions. He tells them to look for water routes, map the terrain, and I am not kidding. Look for woolly mammoths. Jefferson was convinced that giant prehistoric monsters were still roaming around in the West. He was obsessed with fossils. He had a room in the White House filled with mastodon bones. When critics called him an idiot, he would just polish his giant sloth claw and ignore them. But his second term, a disaster. British and French ships are harassing American sailors. Jefferson thinks, "I know how to stop them. We will stop trading with everyone." He passes the Embargo Act of 1807. It forbids American ships from leaving port. He thought this would starve Britain and France. Instead, it destroyed the American economy. Farmers went bankrupt. Smuggling skyrocketed. People hated him. They spelled embargo backwards and called it the Ograbma Act, drawing cartoons of a turtle biting a merchant's butt. Jefferson spends his last days in office depressed, counting down the hours until he can go home. He retires to Monticello to do what he loves most. Spending money he doesn't have. He buys more books. He drinks more expensive wine. Visitors flock to his house to meet the Sage of Monticello. He feeds them, houses them, and entertains them. He's living like a billionaire on a peasant's budget. He is drowning in debt. He owes over $100,000, which is millions today. He tries to sell his library to Congress to pay his debts, which became the Library of Congress, but he immediately starts buying more books. He just couldn't stop. As he gets older, he repairs his friendship with John Adams. They write letters to each other, two old frenemies discussing the meaning of life. And then, the universe delivers the most scripted ending in reality. July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson is on his deathbed. He asks, "Is it the 4th?" The doctor says yes. Jefferson closes his eyes and dies around noon. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, 90-year-old John Adams is dying. His last words are, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He was wrong. Jefferson had died hours earlier. They both died on the exact same day, the day they made famous. You can't write fiction that good. But the ending isn't all fireworks and eagles. Because of Jefferson's massive debt, his family couldn't keep Monticello. After he died, they had to sell everything. The furniture, the paintings, the land, and the people. Hundreds of enslaved people families who had lived at Monticello for generations were put on the auction block and sold off to pay for Jefferson's wine and books. The only ones freed were Sally Hemings' children unofficially, and a few others mentioned in the will. It was a tragic, brutal end to a life dedicated to the word, liberty. So who is Thomas Jefferson? He is the American riddle. He gave the world the language of human rights, yet denied them to his own family. He was a visionary who looked to the future, but was trapped by the sins of his present. He was brilliant, frustrating, elegant, and deeply flawed. He is the reason you have religious freedom, the reason the U.S. is a continental superpower, and the reason you can eat mac and cheese while spinning in a chair. A complicated legacy for a complicated man. And honestly, he probably wouldn't have it any other way. Now put down that $2 bill and go read a book. Jefferson would want you to. He returns to America in 1789, expecting a chill job. Instead, George Washington makes him Secretary of State. And waiting for him is his arch-nemesis, Alexander Hamilton. This rivalry makes Tupac versus Biggie look like a playground fight. Hamilton wants a strong central government, a national bank, and an industrial economy. He's the city boy. Jefferson wants a nation of small farmers, hates banks, and wants states to have the power. He's the country boy. They hate each other viscerally. Hamilton talks for hours. Jefferson sits silently and judges him. Since Jefferson is too passive-aggressive to debate Hamilton face-to-face, he hires a guy to start a newspaper just to trash-talk Hamilton every day. Hamilton hires his own guy to trash-talk Jefferson. It was basically 18th century Twitter. Washington felt like a divorced dad, trying to get his kids to stop fighting in the back seat. Eventually, Jefferson gets tired of the drama, quits, and goes home to plant vegetables. President Jefferson. Now he's the boss. What does he do? He walks to his inauguration instead of taking a carriage. He answers the door of the White House himself, sometimes wearing slippers. He wants to show he's a man of the people. But then he faces a massive test. Napoleon Bonaparte, the little corporal in France, needs cash for his wars. He offers to sell the Louisiana Territory to the U.S. for $15 million. This is a third of the continent. It's a steal. It's 3 cents an acre. But there's a problem. Jefferson is a strict constructionist. He has spent his whole life screaming that the president can only do exactly what the Constitution says. And the Constitution says nothing about buying massive amounts of land from short French dictators. Jefferson struggles. He sweats. He looks at his principles, looks at the map, looks back at his principles, and says, "Screw it, we're buying it." He doubles the size of the United States with the stroke of a pen,